right, guys, let's go ahead and get started with the next panel. I did it. Thanks. If everyone wants to settle down, we'll get settled with the next panel. So Ari Sherwin is Senior Intellectual Property Counsel for the Sherwin-Williams Company, and he's a consultant to the United States Anti-Doping Agency that's tasked with drug testing of Olympic athletes. Ari created the nationally recognized anti-drug and health awareness program called Drugs in Sports, a Losing Game, which has been presented to over 300,000 people since 1993. He's a former drug-free weightlifter. He has he's a nine-time state champion, an American Open record holder, and a national collegiate triple gold medalist in weightlifting. Ari was selected the 2008 American Marshall Memorial Fellow, and he's traveled throughout Europe to meet with a range of policymakers and prominent members of business and government. He received his BS in Biological Sciences from Ohio State, an MS in Anatomical Studies from Case Western, and his JD from Cleveland Marshall College of Law. So Ari and his esteemed panelists will present Anabolic Abuse, the societal impact and IP of performance-enhancing drugs.
All right, thanks, Krista. And good morning. It's great to be here, and as mentioned, our esteemed panelists will make me look better and make the program more interesting. And I promise the next 60 minutes will not be your typical CLE program on substance abuse, professionalism, and ethics. Because typically, for lawyers, doctors, accountants, when you need those continuing education credits, you hear the story of a business professional who just drank too much and the alcoholism ruined their lives and their businesses. Today, something a little different, I assure you. And although initially focused upon the sports world, you'll soon realize that these insidious substances are affecting people from all backgrounds, whether they're school children, high school, college, law students, and even business professionals, because the abuse of illicit drugs casts a shadow over virtually all aspects of American life. And the dangers associated with steroids, hormones, and supplements, a lot of people just aren't familiar with, even though they're using them and even though a lot of them are legal. But because I do practice intellectual property, I was curious about some of the patents that may be out there relating to alcohol. So I came across this beer umbrella that you can use to cool your beer or alcoholic beverage while outside, an actual granted U.S. patent. This was a little more complicated, a method patent and process for creating alcoholic beverages derived from animal extract. Sounds delicious. All right, a brief timeline of events that will bring us up to present day, and then we'll dovetail into issues that are affecting lawyers, doctors, accountants, and other business professionals, in addition to college students and law students. 1990, former President George Bush Sr. enacts into law the Anabolic Steroids Control Act. And before 1990, it was very easy to possess, buy, and distribute anabolic steroids pretty much without any type of penalty. 1992, anybody recognize this guy? Lyle Alzado, exactly. Played for the Broncos, the Browns, the Raiders. He died at the age of 43 from a brain tumor. And before he passed away, he was very candid about his use of anabolic steroids and human growth hormone, which is very popular now with business professionals. And we'll talk about that in a moment. 1998 is the year that Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were battling it out for home run king. McGwire ended the season with 70 home runs. And then a few years later, in 2005, Rafael Palmeiro, McGwire, Jose Canseco, Curt Schilling, and Sosa appeared before congressional hearings looking into the use of performance-enhancing drugs, not only in baseball, not only in professional sports, but in colleges and high schools. And during these very hearings, Rafael Palmeiro denied ever using anabolic steroids, and then just 6 months later, he was caught using a horse steroid, stanozolol, and he kind of rode off into the ninth inning sunset, never to be heard from again. 2008, former speedster Marion Jones pled guilty to perjury, served a 6-month federal prison sentence because she was lying to feds about the distribution of steroids through Victor Conti and Balco that was based in San Francisco area, in which Victor was funneling millions of tablets and injectables to Olympic athletes, professional athletes, and even college athletes. She, of course, went on which program to kind of unload and admit her wrongdoing? On Oprah. She kind of hedged her admission, though, because she said that she never knowingly took any steroids and that some of her drinks were spiked or that she was just unknowingly injected or given steroids when she was training. 2012, no longer with the Browns, but former D-back Joe Hayden was caught using Adderall, a very popular stimulant used by a lot of people medically to help treat things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Adderall and Ritalin, though, are being used and abused by tons of students and professionals because of the effects of stimulating the mind, keeping you up late at night, finishing up that brief that's due the following morning, and a lot of medical conditions that can arise out of that. Same year in 2012, the wheels kind of literally and figuratively fell off of the career for Lance Armstrong. USADA, as Krista mentioned, the United States Anti-Doping Agency, for which I do some consulting, investigated Lance Armstrong, and it was found out that he was not only using performance-enhancing drugs, but also forcing some of his teammates to do the same. He too went on Oprah, never really admitted to it. He said that he was complicit in wrongdoing, but never admitted to using any types of performance-enhancing drugs. And then in tennis, 2016, Maria Sharapova was caught using meldonium, and this is a drug used for people battling coronary artery disease. Meldonium kind of loosens up the smooth muscles of the arteries, allowing more oxygen to get to your muscles, gives you more energy, is able to provide more and quicker recovery for athletes. And then just last month, Fernando Tatis from the Padres was caught using a steroid, clobestol, which is frequently used to treat conditions like ringworm. It has a lot of dermatological, ophthalmological uses, but it is a steroid, and it works like a lot of other steroids. So we'll get to that in a second as well. The question typically asked, especially when I speak to lawyers, doctors, accountants, why talk about these drugs with a bunch of business professionals? So even if you're not taking them, for those of you who have kids, nephews, colleagues with kids, these drugs are being used widespread throughout all types of sports. And again, not just with Olympians, but college athletes and people in high school. But a lot of professionals are using derivatives of steroids and hormones to look better, to feel better. Most steroids are related to the male hormone testosterone, and they work. They will make you bigger, they'll make you faster, they'll make you stronger. That's why they're being abused. And I've always been looking for that story of an attorney who was hooked on steroids, kind of losing it in a bout of roid rage during a CMC, or pretrial hearing. Finally, I did unearth a story from just a few years ago. Locally, there was a criminal defense attorney, Thomas Bauer, who was trading legal services for steroids. And he was caught in a sting operation, ultimately pled guilty, and was ordered to do community service. Again, a lot of professionals using steroids not to compete in the Olympics, but to just feel better, look better, without knowing some of the severe consequences. And there are different types of steroids that are out there. A lot of people just assume they're tablets, and that's the most common form. And I brought a few examples today. The way you can take steroids really breaks down to the 4 S's. You can stick them, you can swallow them, you can smear them on your skin, and you can smell them. So the tablets are the most common forms. And one type is stanozolol. I mentioned that when I said Rafael Palmeiro's name, the baseball player who eventually got caught. During the 1980s and 90s, Anavar was a very popular tablet. Again, taken orally, just a pill or capsule, and Nelavar. These are, in terms of trying to beat drug tests, which we'll get into in a moment, are fine for using because they get in and out of your system quickly, but they're not as effective as the injectables. And when I was in Europe in 2008, I was curious how easy it would be to get steroids at local pharmacies. So I popped in one in Belgrade. I asked for steroids. No one asked me for my ID. And a few minutes later, they came back with pure liquid testosterone. And actually, as I was walking out of the door, they threw me a free syringe. Said it was on the house. The liquid injectables are more effective in terms of instigating muscle growth, but they stay in your system longer, so the athletes run the risk of popping a positive on a drug test. And then the two other forms are the ointments that you can actually place on your skin, and the inhalants that are used medically also to treat conditions like asthma. So where do they start? The first steroid was invented by Ciba Pharmaceuticals in 1957, metadione, and then it was eventually marketed as Dianabol in 1958. A lot of patents surrounding those early inventions. And it wasn't just the weightlifters who started using and abusing steroids. Virtually every sport is involved with the use of these drugs, whether it's rowing, swimming, and cycling, because, again, they work. And especially in other sports that require more endurance versus strength, there are other types of performance-enhancing drugs that athletes are using. Even in sports you would never associate with steroids, John McEnroe, phenomenal, famous tennis player, came out in the news several years ago, admitted to using steroids, not to bench press 400 pounds or deadlift 1,000 pounds, but to recover from injuries when he was competing. I mentioned Lyle Alzado, and he was very candid and open about his steroid use before he died, because he wanted to let others know, younger athletes know, how dangerous they were. He used steroids and human growth hormone for about 15 years, and near the end of his life became so weak. He lost about 80 pounds of body weight the last 3 months of his life that his wife actually had to carry him around the house piggyback. It's a little more disturbing and upsetting when you hear about younger athletes using these drugs. 1988, the year that I graduated from high school, Benji Ramirez was one of the top football players in the state of Ohio. He played at Ashtabula High School. And ironically, it was on Halloween Day of 1988. Ashtabula was getting ready for the playoffs, and they were going through some drills in the field. Actually, Benji picked up a fumbled ball, was running down the field, and then felt a sharp pain in his chest, which radiated down his arms. He was rushed to the hospital and later died of a heart attack at the tender age of 17. Now, the tragic part of the story is not only did he die, but a lot of people knew he was using steroids. His friends, family members, and even coaches. But this was, over 30 years ago, and we really weren't too sure about what the dangers were associated with these drugs. Now we do. There are more research, track records that are concluding that the use of steroids can lead to all types of conditions, including heart attacks, strokes, liver diseases. This picture of Benji Ramirez lying in his coffin appeared in Sports Illustrated, and it was a full story that shared the details of the story that I just shared with you today. Just very tragic. I had the opportunity to meet with one of Benji's teammates, Mark Craffey, who said exactly what I just told you. Everyone knew he was taking it. He got it from the local gym, and because of the results, he started taking more. Steroids can also become incredibly addictive. Well, at this time, I would like to introduce another former Cleveland Marshall law grad, Terry Billups. He's currently Chief General Counsel of Legal Affairs and Risk Management at Cuyahoga County Metropolitan Housing Authority. Terry has a lot of responsibilities, including contract negotiations, handling labor and employment disputes, transactions, litigation. He had his own practice, the Billups Law Firm, before joining CMHA, and was the former general counsel of Ursuline College. Terry went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and played as a professional football player in the NFL for the Dallas Cowboys, for the New England Patriots, and the Miami Dolphins as well, right? Correct. And I would love for Terry to come up here and kind of elaborate on your background in sports and maybe give us a little insight with respect to the use of performance-enhancing drugs in the sports world and elsewhere. Thanks, Terry.
Yeah. Good afternoon. As Ari indicated, I did play professional football, played for the Dallas Cowboys, New England Patriots, Miami. Oftentimes, we don't talk about Miami since I was only there for literally about a week and a half or 2 weeks before they shipped me off to Dallas. So it was a very short stint, and I waited to move my furniture from New England to make sure I was like, okay, I'm gonna be here for a little while, so I'll go ahead and move my furniture. Literally, the day my furniture got to Miami, I was on a plane to Dallas. So sort of the life of a NFL football player. The thing about it is. I know we're sort of focusing on the performance-enhancing drugs. But when I was in college, I actually didn't know many athletes who were using steroids or performance-enhancing drugs. The issue more or less ended up being athletes who were using marijuana. And as a college athlete, obviously that was prohibited. And, we get routinely drug tested throughout the season. You have some drug tests that you know are going to happen on certain dates, so athletes know when there's going to be, and sometimes you can get sort of spot checked. You sort of knew the athletes who were using and trying to avoid getting caught. A lot of times they would walk around with these large jugs of water or whatever they may have had in it, hoping or thinking they were going to flush the drugs out of their system. The issues obviously is that especially as a collegiate athlete, in addition to just the health effects of it, the conversations often would be getting the athletes and players to also understand the nature of their running risk of not being able to play, of getting suspended or kicked off the team. And it was the dual role of both their individual risk and then the risk to the team. Because when you have a star athlete on a team who gets caught using drugs, it not only affects their ability both on the field, being able to perform, it affects the other athletes they have on the team. And so even when you look at it in the environment of the legal world or law firm or anything else, oftentimes we are working sort of in a team environment, in a team group. Multiple people are working on cases and projects together. And as one person who has an issue or battling issues with the use of drugs or performance-enhancing drugs, it not only affects them, but it also affects the individuals they're working with. It affects their family, it affects their friends and their colleagues. And so those were the issues oftentimes, or the conversation discussions that we would have with any of our colleagues or players at that time who we knew were using, and not only jeopardizing their own eligibility, but also jeopardizing the ability of the team as a whole. So I'm not sure what else you want to say.
That's great, Terry. And I'm just curious, if you can share with us, what does professionalism mean to you? And aside from sports world, what do you expect of yourself and others in the workplace, from your colleagues, et cetera?
Well, and I think to go along with that, it's accountability. And so when we talk about, as I mentioned, that, when somebody is abusing or using drugs, not only does it affect their own accountability to themselves, but it affects their accountability to the others around them and to their colleagues and their family and friends. And so professionalism is being accountable for your actions. Professionalism is, showing up, doing what you're supposed to do. One of the mottos is always, said to athletes, as far as I can remember, as from high school to college to pros, every coach I know has always said, do your job. You have be responsible for what your responsibilities are in your job, and do your job. Your teammates will do their job, but you do your job. And so to me, professionalism is understanding and knowing what your job is, showing up and being accountable to do your job.
Appreciate it, Terry. I mentioned that steroids are also used medically. This is a picture of my kid, Jackson, when he was about a year old. We had to take him to the hospital because he had croup. So for those of you who are using any sort of corticosteroid or anabolic steroid that are medically prescribed, no worries. We're talking about people using and abusing those that shouldn't be taken or taken in excess. Quickly, just some of the side effects from those folks deciding to take steroids include male pattern baldness, premature baldness. We're not talking about when you're in your 50s or in your 60s, but when you're 20 years old, in your late teens. Horrible bouts of acne, especially on the back of your body, which is often referred to as backne, not a pleasant sight. A lot of steroid users will also exhibit jaundice appearance. Your eyes, your skin will become discolored, yellowish in color, and that's because steroids will attack your liver and your kidneys, which help to clean and filter your blood. For guys using steroids, they will suffer testicular atrophy, which is essentially shrinkage of the testicles, can lead to impotence, sterility. And again, the reason why people take it is because they work in terms of making your muscles stronger. but they weaken your connective tissues, they weaken your joints, your bones, and after a period of time, something's got to give, and that's exactly what happened with this athlete. This picture was taken when I competed at the 1999 World Championships. It's a Bulgarian lifter who broke his arm in 3 places. I'll share the more amusing drug testing side of the story in just a moment. And it's not just the men, it's not just the guys, plenty of women, plenty of female teenagers who are deciding to use and abuse steroids. And the side effects are similar to guys, although in addition to those other side effects, the use of steroids in women can lead to a lot of disorders when it comes to the reproductive cycle, etc. All right, so for additional insight and to hear from someone who decided to do it right, to do it clean, Diana Munns has joined us today, Olympic multi-medalist, including a gold medalist from the 2000 Olympic Games. Diana Munns grew up in Moreland Hills, graduated from Chagrin Falls High School, went to John Carroll to swim, and since you competed in 2000, it just hit me when I was looking through your bio. I'm assuming you named your oldest daughter Sydney because the Olympics were in Sydney, Australia? I like that, very classy. And when Diana finished up her career as a competitive swimmer, also worked at the Spire Athletic Facility out in Geneva, which is a top-tier training facility for athletes of all sports. And Diana, thank you so much for being with us today. We'd love to hear your insight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I do have to say, the youngness of me came out when you started pulling those out. I got scared again. It was that moment of like where I was competing and what was available to people and the scariness of the trust that we put into our parents, doctors, coaches, anybody that was a huge role model for us. So it did bring back, gives me actually goosebumps to just think about that fear that we had embedded in us that was out there at the time. And we were American athletes that would go international, and it wasn't so much apparent to us probably in our high school years, even probably more so once you hit college. But professionally, once you hit the international level, it was very much apparent. And I give a lot of credit to really the United States because we were able to catch some of that stuff beforehand. And some of these athletes, when we would go over, we were shocked by that international stage that was brought to our attention. When I think about it now, or I thought about it then, some of these kids that were competing in other countries internationally, this was everything to them. For us, it was a sport. It was something that we loved to do. We did it because our parents kind of let us do it. For them, it was a very small age that some of these athletes came out, and I'm going to gymnastics, but they were by their height. They would stand against a wall. They would be put against a wall. They would raise their arm. If their elbow wasn't above their head, they were out. So when you looked at it in that perspective, you got more scared because you were trusting in that coach or trusting in that parent or trusting in that doctor to tell you exactly what you were taking. But you also have to look at it as a child too and say, if you have kids, nieces, nephews, whatever it is, they're not looking at long-term effects. They're looking at instant results. That's something that we're dealing with really today with social media. Somebody sees somebody that has a beautiful body or is super strong. I want that. How do they get that? What are they going to do to get that? I'll take anything to get that. Here we go. Now we're going off of trust. Just going back to some, we have to protect them. We have to protect these kids from that stuff because we are at an early age. I went to my first international competition when I just turned 13 years old. That's 8th grade. I wasn't even in high school at that point. Going to a stage at international competition at that age, I was doing it for fun. I loved the sport. I wanted to swim. Drugs, all that stuff wasn't even on the radar for me at that time. We joke about the marijuana stuff that you were talking about. The Michael Phelps story. Everybody knows that story. He was caught with marijuana. As athletes, we were sort of laughing at it at first because at that time it was a relaxing drug. It was supposed to be, just to hang out and have a good time. It was never a performance-enhancing drug to us at that time. That was professionalism. He didn't show what that meant for young children at the time. You take a drug, what happens? You lose sponsors, you lose a lot of part of your life, and that to us was the interesting side to what the media was showing, which was, is this a performance-enhancing drug, or is he showing poor professionalism? And that was the sad part for a lot of us that were trying to show that professionalism, which to me is, it can be as simple as showing yourself in an appropriate way, how you're dressed, how you act, language that you use. It's so many different avenues, but as a professional athlete, you're looking at these kids and these kids are looking to you and they want to see what that is like. They want to be like you, so you have to show them the way of how to do that. I'll just give a negative. I went to World Championships and I was on a 4x200 freestyle relay. I was the last leg of the relay, and I, at the very end of the race, slammed my arm down, and I can't tell you if I did or did not. I definitely said in my mind a swear word. It was totally caught on camera because I was the finish. We missed the world record by 1/100th of a second. That's what went through my mind, that I knew when I looked at that clock that I had missed it. Slammed my arm down, used a swear word. The rest of the swimming, I was shown as the girl that swore on live television. Then you come into play of, okay, this girl works so hard. She's been training every single day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out. And that was what we saw. That was who I was during that meet. That is what we're facing with some of these athletes today, that everything is seen, judgment is seen. I think that we have to look at that as almost an empathy side, to look at the other side of the situation, put yourself in their shoes, and to see it on their side. I can't say that I was at blame. I definitely said it. I don't disagree that I didn't say it because I was extremely mad, but there it was, and it's way more. If that was today's world, that would be everywhere, on every sort of social media news of any sort.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Diana.
Absolutely.
We'll have you come back up with Terry in a little bit. But let's give something away. Krista mentioned some Olympic autographed memorabilia, an Olympic T-shirt autographed by Diana Munns. If you can tell me by raising your hand, name one of the events that Diana competed in at the Olympics in which she medaled. Take a guess. Go for it. Two free. There you go. Nice job. All right, I mentioned HGH, human growth hormone, which we all produce naturally in very small amounts by the pituitary gland. And in 1986, some scientists came up with some clever recombinant DNA technology to create this stuff in the laboratory. Before 86, you had to extract human growth hormone from cadavers. After 86, you can make plenty of it. And the largest producer today is China. The only problem with the HGH that's out there is you don't know what may be mixed with it. And the first person really to make headlines with respect to HGH was this guy. Anyone recognize this former? Yeah, exactly. Andre the Giant, who stood 6 feet 3 inches and weighed 240 pounds at the age of 12. And by the time he was a fully grown man, stood 7'4" and weighed close to 500 pounds. He didn't take HGH unnaturally. He wasn't injecting himself with this stuff. He had an abnormal pituitary gland that just spit out too much of it. And he ended up developing this condition that a lot of other people are developing. A lot of business professionals are developing, who are going to these anti-aging clinics looking for prescriptions for steroids and hormones to get stronger, to develop confidence, to burn fat, not realizing what may go on. This is called acromegaly, in which the soft tissues of your hands, your feet, your jaws, your forehead start to grow. Now, steroids will make your muscles bigger. HGH takes that extra step and makes everything grow. Your bones, your connective tissues, your internal organs, which can lead to a whole new set of complications. Sylvester Stallone made news in, I think it was 2007, 2008, when he was filming a movie in Australia. He was caught bringing in an entire suitcase filled with 48 vials of human growth hormone. To his credit, he admitted to using HGH for years and said he was using it under medical supervision. To his discredit, he filmed Rocky V, but that's a different story. Former Cleveland Indians, then Cleveland Indians pitcher Paul Byrd made news when just hours before Game 6 of the American League Championship Series, it was announced that Byrd had been using illegally human growth hormone. He said, though, he was taking it for a medical condition because some people who have various types of growth disorders are prescribed HGH in very small amounts, but its kind of credibility weakened when it was later found out that his HGH specialist was a dentist who had lost his license. Matt Ghaffari is a former Cleveland State University grad. And by the way, Diana, you have ties to the law school, right? Your sister Ryan and brother-in-law John Burns are former Cleveland Marshall grads. Matt Ghaffari didn't go to law school here, but he did go to Cleveland State and won an Olympic silver medal at, let's see, the 96 games. And if anyone can tell us where the 96, by raising your hand, where's that? Atlanta, there you go. Nice job. Matt Ghaffari signed shirt. He couldn't be with us today, but he sends his regards. So drug testing. How are people getting caught? How are the athletes getting around the tests? Up until a few years ago, it was relatively easy for athletes to bypass the tests, but the testing procedures have become better. And there's a lot of IP behind these innovative procedures involving taking hair samples, saliva, urine, and even blood. And actually, back in the day when I competed in the 80s and the 90s, the typical scenario for getting drug tested was dealing with one of these simplistic Lego kits. And you'd be called down, sometimes randomly, to a hospital to offer a urine sample. They would hand you a beaker and ask you to go to the bathroom. No one would accompany you into the bathroom. So I knew a lot of other athletes who were just hiding their friends' or their siblings' urine in pouches and then dumping it into the beaker and then taking it back to the drug testers. But the tests have gotten better, and now they're using a little more advanced procedures involving blood testing, which are much more difficult to evade. Ben Johnson made headlines at the '88 Seoul Summer Olympics after he won gold, shattered the world record in the 100 meters by running it in 9.79 seconds, but then later came out that he was using steroids. I was traveling to Toronto right before the pandemic, and I recall that he was living there at one point, and within 30 minutes, I got a hold of his cell number. He agreed to meet me for dinner, and it was a fascinating dinner in which he pretty much admitted to using any and every kind of steroid and hormone. Why? Because he figured everyone else was, which brings up a whole question of ethics in sports, ethics in business. Either way, it was a fascinating dinner, and he also shared with me that after he was kicked out of the Olympics, to make money, he would race horses during seventh-inning stretches at baseball games, and he was also hired by former Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi to train his son in soccer to become faster and stronger. Got to make a living, right? I had a chance to meet with Dr. Luis Horta in Portugal, who drug tested Floyd Landis, and again shared some insight into the better testing procedures that are out there. Essentially, when a urine sample is collected, it's divided into an A sample and a B sample. The A sample is tested, and if it comes up positive, the athletes are invited to witness the testing of the B sample. And some really cool technology involved with the testing, which is, again, making it tougher for athletes to evade the tests. Back in, I think these were at the Olympics, Diana, when you competed, right? Michelle Smith, right? She was a swimmer from Ireland, and I believe she won gold. I can't remember which event, but it later came out that she failed a drug test because when she gave her sample and handed the beaker back, she had some enzyme on her fingertips that was used to adulterate the sample, but they caught her. Athletes become very, very creative, or they used to, in terms of trying to evade the tests. And I mentioned, we'll go back. I mentioned that one weightlifter. Oh. At the beginning, well, I can't find his picture now. This guy, who snapped his arm back. And I had a chance to speak with the drug testers involved with his testing procedure. And essentially, when it was found out that he tested positive, he was kicked out of the sport for a couple of years, which didn't matter because this injury essentially ended his career. But they came back with good news, and that was he was pregnant. And that's because when he was called in for his drug test, he used an elaborate set of tubes connected to a plastic bladder that was filled with his sister's urine. And they detected HCG, which is a pregnancy hormone, in his sample, and was able to share the good news with his sister afterwards, even though he was kicked out of the sport. All right. Very briefly, I want to just touch upon the issue of supplements in sports. Not only in sports, but the use of supplements being used by all kinds of people, whether to lose weight, to gain weight, to get extra energy. A lot of these dietary supplements, protein, strength-enhancing supplements are legal, but just because they're legal doesn't mean they're safe. And the best example I can give is that of fen-phen. You may recall the dietary medication fen-phen from the late 80s, early 90s. You needed a doctor's prescription to take it. Millions of Americans were using it. And then the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Disease and Control, came out with public warnings urging anyone who had been using fen-phen to lose weight, and it was working. People were losing it like crazy, to seek medical evaluation because there was a concern that fen-phen could lead to the destruction of the heart valves. Well, it turned out that thousands went to the doctor, hundreds required surgeries, and dozens died. And then later, a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit was settled with American Home Products, the manufacturer of fen-phen. Again, came out, it was actually vetted by the FDA, unlike dietary supplements today, which are not vetted by the FDA at all. The FDA only steps in if there are issues after it's launched, after it's used by consumers. And there are tons of supplements out there today. Again, the dietary supplement, strength supplement industry is fairly unregulated. They don't have to go through stringent testing by the government to be released. There are requirements for labeling that you can't put on a supplement label that it diagnoses or prevents, treats, or cures a disease. But it does not have to go through a vetting, testing process. Only if there's an issue or if there are complaints lodged by users will the FDA then step in. And that's why you have to be very careful, because ephedrine was very popular during the late 90s, early 2000s as a way to lose weight, a stimulant, raised the heart rate, made you breathe faster, constricted your blood vessels, right? Not the best way to get in shape. 2003, former Baltimore Orioles pitcher Steve Beckler reported to spring training overweight, was taking ephedra, and then later collapsed on the mound, was rushed to the hospital, and died of heat stroke. Ephedra was soon thereafter taken off of the shelves. Tryptophan, it's an amino acid, one of the amino acids that we naturally produce, but tryptophan was also sold as a supplement, as a sleep aid, because the old adage of having turkey, especially at Thanksgiving, will make you tired. True to some extent, because turkey contains a large amount of tryptophan, and tryptophan will help aid in sleep. But usually most people get tired because they're just overeating. So tryptophan was used for several years by people to help promote sleep, and it then was released. It became known that people using tryptophan were developing this blood disorder, eosinophilia myalgia, in which the blood got more viscous, made it more difficult for the heart to pump the blood, and led to strokes and heart attacks. So again, have to be very careful with what you may be taking, or what your kids may be taking, or people you know. Rashard Lewis played basketball for the Magic, and he got popped in a test because he was taking a supplement. He wasn't taking steroids or human growth hormone, and probably unknowingly was using a supplement that contained a banned substance. So for those of you who are taking or will be taking a drug test, know of others, you can simply call the United States Anti-Doping Agency. There's a hotline, there's a website that lists all the banned substances, especially since a lot of drug tests are becoming more prolific in the workplace. Same thing happened, actually, as did with Rashard Lewis to Andrea Radikon at the 2000 games as well. A gymnast who got caught using pseudoephedrine, cold medication, banned substance, should have been apprised by her coaches not to take it, but was kicked out of the games. All right, Dominique Moceanu was scheduled to be with us today as well, but had to bow out at the last minute. But she did provide us with an autographed shirt, so let's go to this side of the room. Little IP trivia question. In 1857, on this day, September 16th of 1857, this very famous song was copyright registered. It's very popular during the wintertime, during the holidays. No, close though. More holiday, who said Jingle Bells? Nice job, Jingle Bells, excellent. Congratulations. All right. Just flip ahead here to one of our last topics. I'm going to skip over the energy stuff. We just want to touch upon this, one of these last topics. Prescription medications, right, becoming very, very popular for abuse. I mentioned Joe Hayden at the beginning of the program with stimulants that are being used by a lot of college students, law students, business professionals to just stay up late at night to help with focusing their mind and energy. Okay if you have a doctor's prescription, not okay if you're sharing it from others who do. And on the flip side, a lot of the sedatives and the opioids have, of course, made news for the past several years. And I'm not going to elaborate, but it all started, at least in the sports world, a number of athletes taking painkillers, right? Because obviously a lot of athletes are susceptible to injuries, working through pain. Brett Favre made headlines when he was taking Vicodin during his playing days. He's also in the news now on an unrelated topic involving diverting federal funds to building athletic facilities. We won't get into that. After Brett Favre's story, it became known that a lot of other people were using and abusing opioids to treat pain, especially after heroin was essentially not taken off the streets, but was becoming increasingly difficult to find heroin. This is a picture of my brother, who was the former U.S. attorney in D.C. At the time of the January 6th events, and he was responsible for a lot of the indictments and prosecutions before he left the Department of Justice. But my brother, Michael Sherwin, spent time in Afghanistan when he was with the DOJ, when he was with the United States Navy, and he was in Afghanistan to train local Afghan law enforcement to prosecute terrorism cases. And here he's with some evidence that was used in some of the cases. But when he was there, he realized how bad it was with the issue of heroin on the streets in the United States, because 60% of the world's heroin comes from Afghanistan, although a lot of that is diverted to Russia for packaging. But through laws, regulations, law enforcement, a lot of the heroin was eradicated, and of course people wanted to switch to something else, including opioids. The Russians came up with crocodile, which is a version of heroin that's made using morphine constituents, and it's unbelievably dangerous because a lot of cleaning products are used, and the people who are addicted to crocodile will actually, while they're still using the drug and while they're alive, will experience necrosis of the skin. The skin will start basically to die. The drug will eat through the skin and actually expose bones in living people addicted to this drug. So if you have a weak stomach, you may want to turn away. But the next picture is of someone addicted to crocodile and just demonstrates how devastating this drug is. It's a living person, exposed bone, unbelievable. Enough about crocodile. In East Liverpool, Ohio, a few years ago, before the opioid epidemic really ravaged the entire country, and it really started in Portsmouth, Ohio. This picture was taken in East Liverpool, showing a couple knocked unconscious because of using opioids in a running car. Picture of a grandmother and her boyfriend with the grandmother's grandson seated in the back seat. Unbelievable. And just recently, we heard news that came out of the Northern District of Ohio. Federal Judge Dan Polster, District Judge Dan Polster, ordered that a number of pharmaceutical companies, including CVS, Walgreens, even Walmart, pay $650 million to the counties of Lake and Trumbull to help fight this opioid epidemic. Candace Capozzello is with us today. She worked with Judge Dan Polster. He did a judicial externship, right? Candace is a former Cleveland Marshall grad. She actually graduated in the top 10% of her class, and I believe you scored in the top 1% of bar takers, right? Phenomenal. Candace is with Equity Trust Company and ETC Brokerage Services, ETC, where she handles a lot of legal matters involving contracts, transactions, policies involving privacy, litigation as well. She used to be at Ulmer & Byrne, where she represented a large number of financial institutions, but she's here today to share a very personal and compelling story that touches upon this subject. Candace, thanks so much for joining us.
everyone. Thanks, Ari. So, with a number like $650 million, a judgment in that amount, you have to suspect that quite a few people are suffering from addiction to opioids. My brother he's one of those people. So, that person in a room that just fills the room, right? Like the life of the party, the fun person, that person you want to be around all the time. So that was my brother, Zach. Very charismatic kid, fun, excellent athlete. I'm 5'10". I played basketball for D3 at Case. My brother, though, I'm the shortest one in my family. So he was easily 6'6", excellent athlete, was looked at by scouts all over. He played at Menor and was like the D1 player of the week multiple times, on the football dream team for Northeast Ohio and all of that. His senior year, he got hurt, and he hurt his shoulder, and he ended up developing bursitis in his shoulder. And bursitis is like one of those, I guess it's a soft injury issue. And so there's no surgery or anything that can fix it. The remedy for it is rest. However, D1 athletes, they don't rest, right? Like you just keep on doing what you do. And at that time, it's the senior year. This is happening right before playoffs. Scouts are looking at him. He's like, I have to play. So he goes to the doctor, gets some, I think it was Percocet. So that helped, right? Because it numbs the pain. He can actually lift his arm above his head then, using those pills. So they end up, doing really well that year in the playoffs, and he gets a scholarship to play football at a D1 school. So great. So unfortunately, because he gets that scholarship, he never takes that time off. He has to keep on working hard, lifting, working out, all of that. So, just take more pills. And again, it's all under the eyes of a doctor. He still has bursitis. Without the pills, he can't even do this with his arm. So, continues on, goes to his D1 college, gets there, and the medical staff looks at him and they're like, well, you can't be taking these here. And so you need to take time off and rest, and you need to get healthy. So that's what he does. And he comes back home and he just decides, maybe that's just not for me. Maybe I just need to take a step back and relax and reevaluate things. So, at this point, he's 18 years old, and football was his life, and that's not in his life anymore. At that time, I was an undergrad at Case, and he applies then to go to Case, and so then, we're in the same college together. He's hanging out with my boyfriend's fraternity, my husband now, and developing great friendships. He decides to play football for Case. So he's doing great. He gets hurt again, right? So this time, he decides, I'm just going to take it easy. It's D3. It's not as hard as the D1 requirements, and he's not going up against those really big kids. These are just kind of big kids. And so he takes some time off, and, he's doing the right thing, right? He's trying to stay away from those pills. He learned his lesson. Can't do those and play college sports. So it doesn't work. So what does he do? He goes back to taking those pills again because he really wants to play. He gets caught, and they're like, you can't do this. You have to leave. So he gets put on athletic suspension, not academic suspension. So he's still in school. He's hanging out with his fraternity brothers and friends, having a great time. So then I graduate, and he's still at school. He's still hanging out with those guys. The next year, that class graduates, and so he's younger, but he's always been hanging out with the older kids at school. He never developed friendships with people in his class. So he gets pretty lonely. So he goes to what makes him feel good, and he starts taking pills again. At this point, obviously, no one in my family knows any of this. None of his friends know any of this. And so he's hiding it. So then, the summer before I start law school, Zach, he turns 21. And he comes to us, my boyfriend at the time, and me, and he's like, I need help. Like, I have an issue. I know you know about the pills and stuff. I couldn't find the pills, so I started doing heroin. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You're a kid from Menor. You're an athlete. Like, come on. You cannot be doing heroin. It's like, no, I couldn't find the pills. And people said that this is the same as pills, and it is. And he's like, I just can't believe that I'm doing this. And so, I'm like, well, I don't see any marks on your arms. I don't, right? That's what I always thought heroin users did. You would see evidence of it, like on their arms or somewhere that would be visible. He's like, no. You can find other places to shoot where people won't find it. And so, he's like, I'm really embarrassed. I have this problem. I need help. So we're like, okay. So he goes into rehab. And he actually comes out 2 weeks before he turns 21. And he's like, I'm good, I'm great, I feel good. So, we celebrate his 21st birthday at a dry party, have a really good time. That summer, he gets some jobs at Home Depot and restaurants and stuff like that, trying to figure things out. And then he comes back to us and he's like, so I messed up again. I used again. And I need to go back to rehab. So we're like, you've got to be kidding me. So we call around, and during this time, it's really hard to find a bed in these rehab facilities. So we call around, and we found one, but it's not going to be ready for I think it was 5 days. So Zach moves in with us, and I take his phone, take his keys, search everything. And I'm like, if you leave this house, or this apartment actually, we were living downtown, that's it. You can't come back. So he stayed, worked with him through night sweats and all of that, and then he goes to rehab. And he does great, comes out, develops some friendships with some people there that he thought were on the right track and everything. He comes out and he sets up some sort of get-together with friends. He ends up getting stood up by one of the girls in the group, and he takes it very personally. And so what does he do when he gets upset? He goes to use. So he used, and he overdosed, and he died. And we found out because the Eastlake Police Department called me and said, we have someone that we think you might know. Because I just so happened to be calling him that day, and his cell phone just kept on ringing, sister, sister, sister. So note, have your kids put mom or dad in their cell phones and not your first name, because the police department, I guess they were saying that they couldn't figure out who in his cell phone was the appropriate person to call. So at that point, Zach's dead. So the aftermath of that, right? So Zach had always said he felt alone, and he didn't know how to tell people his problem. And he was always a very social person, and he didn't like being by himself. And he's like, I have no friends. I am not doing well in school. I failed out of football, basically. I'm alone. Well, it's really unfortunate because, there were over 500 people at his funeral there that would have supported him. Like, at any minute, he could have reached out. So I say all of this because, one, I think that this story can happen to anyone, and it obviously is by that huge verdict. And two, I will say addiction. I was, for a time, on the associate board for Recovery Resources. And what Recovery Resources always stresses is that addiction is a disease, and it's something that requires treatment throughout your life. So to the extent that people need assistance or need help, like it's something that's it's reoccurring. It's an everyday fight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Candace. Appreciate your strength. And it's one thing to read about these stories and another thing to actually hear it from someone who experienced it firsthand. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, well, we're wrapping up this session. To the extent that Diana and Terry can stick around afterwards and maybe share how they are continuing to stay in shape and stay focused after their playing in competitive days, please feel free to approach them. I want to thank Krista Laser, Dean Lee Fisher, and all the sponsors for putting on today's program. See you this afternoon. Take care.
All right, everyone. Lunch is outside, just outside the room.